Dr. Pappalardo.
Thank you, Vice President Kinney, Superintendent McDonald, board members. On January 9th, the governor made his proposals for the 2015-16 budget recommendations. This is what we call the beginning of the budget season, as it were. Governor presents by January 10th. It then goes to committees. We have some changes. We may revise. We will have an adopted budget by the deadline on June 30th, since the state of California changed their rules from a two-thirds supermajority to a simple majority to pass a budget in the state of California, like most states in the union. So with that, what I want to do is just touch on the main point, and that is what is going on with LCFF funding and what it means to PUSD, and what are the changes between when we were here just a little over a month ago on December 18th to today on January 22nd. So as of December, a month ago, the governor's projections and recommendations from last June were that the 2015-16, what's called the gap funding, and that's really the increase in funding for schools to try and get to fully funded LCFF by 2020-21, was 20.68%, and the cost of living adjustment projected for 2015-16 was 2.19%. As you know, when we adopt budgets, we adopt the current fiscal year, and then we do two out-year projections, multi-year projections when we do that. So 2016-17, the gap funding was set at 25.48% with a COLA of 2.14. Governor came out on January 9th and said, good news, there's lots of money in the state. We're going to put over $4 billion into LCFF, which will be able to fund 32.19% of the gap. And that's sort of where the news stopped. Unfortunately, the devil is always in the details, and you can see there the cost of living adjustment now for 2015-16 is projected to be 1.58%. Doesn't seem like a lot. You go 0.61%, it's pretty small. 0.61% times $130 million is almost $750,000, $650,000. So that's a loss, but more than made up by the 32.19% gap funding, about $3.9 million more than we were projecting a month ago. However, 2016-17, instead of either keeping the gap funding the same at 32% or keeping it where it was last month at 25.48%, he now said 11%. Now, how you get to 100% in 2021 when you go to 11% in 2016-17, I'm not sure, except that the governor is taking all new money as one-time money, and so he's able to increase the money he gives us next year, but then decreases, as you can see, significantly the money in the following year. So the two-year projection on the governor's budget is actually a little bit less giving to public education just because of the smaller COLA amounts. So last month we talked about what our budget projections were, and we were looking at ending this year, as we all know, right at our required reserve amount of 3%, about almost $6.2 million. I do have a nice chart that I didn't bring, but you'll see it later. You saw it in unaudited actuals, where in 2008-9 we had a fund balance of in the neighborhood of $23 million, down now to projecting 6.2. Next year, 2015-16, we were talking about having to reduce our budget by $3.6 million ongoing, leaving us with a 3% reserve in 16-17. So with the governor's new projections that you see there. When we grind those into the projections, what we now have is ending this year the same. Nothing really changed for 2014-15. 15-16 now you can see, instead of having to reduce the 3.6 million, it's gone. We went from revenues now of unrestricted revenues and after transfer to restricted programs of about $118 million. Last month we were at 114.2 million. Now we're at 118.1, so there's the extra 3.9 million. Unfortunately, in the following year, as you look at the 2-year, we're at 117.5 million based on this 11%, where we were at 118.7. So in 2016-17, we're actually down about $1.3 million over the 2 years. So the money he's giving for next year, he's actually not, he's accelerating the funding, and then we're getting a little bit less. So what it does basically is it pushes out our deficit spending into the following year because of this 11% gap funding to about a $3.4 million reduction necessary. In the packet, there is a lot of detailed data we did go over in the last Finance Committee meeting last Thursday. The last page of the packet is a pocket budget from School Services of California. A number of things in there. There's mostly fine news in there. Next up, we're going to be talking about ROP funding a little bit. The governor does put in $250 million in the budget for next year and the following 2 years for consortiums for CTE education. We'll be talking with our 5-Star Coalition members about potentially being able to get together and provide those. There's some money for preschool programs. There is a $1 billion one-time money. The governor is recommending to pay off previous mandates. That gives us about $3 million, and he has some recommendations of what you might use it for, but it's up to the district on their priorities. One-time funding. So those are basically good news items. The budget is good news. The issue here in PUSD, I'm afraid, is what we've been talking about for many years now, and it is declining enrollment. As we work with the superintendent and the master planning group that's meeting, as we've talked with the board, we know our 20-year history. We know that birth rates are down in the Pasadena area, down significantly, about over 30% over the last 15, 18 years. So we just see a declining birth rate, decline of number of students in the district. We seem to be capturing our local students at about the same rate over the last couple decades. We've seen Scott Torlucci and Davis Demographics will be before you next month on some recommendations going forward. So this is where we are at this time. Questions?
Dr. Pappalardo, I thought I saw somewhere, because this whole gap funding thing is very confusing with those percentages, but there is a number that people are talking about how much we are percentage-wise towards being fully funded.
I only chuckle because it is, my favorite thing of this whole idea was that when Governor Brown proposed this, it was going to simplify public education funding. And you remember we used to have a revenue limit dollar, $5,400 times our number of ADA, and that's the money we're getting. About a page of calculations. Now we're on to this tortured 4 pages of depending on how old the kids are and what grade they're in and where you are this year versus next year, and then there's a gap through to 2021, and then we're going to fund that gap at some fixed percentage rate, but we're not going to let districts go below what they're getting this year if you have a very low free and reduced rate. The other thing that's happening is, as we compare ourselves to the country, we've now gone from 50th in the nation in per student funding to about 46th. However, over time in California, the differential of funding within the state can be 35%, you know, from one school to the next. So it is going to be an interesting ongoing. So Ms. Kinney, you asked how close are we getting now? What percentage? Well, here's the thing. If you think of, we're getting a certain amount of money this year, and let's just say $120 million. And in 2020, 21, 5 years, we're supposed to be getting, let's say, $140 million. So the difference between that is $20 million for us. For this next year, the governor is saying we're going to fund 32.19%, but in the following year, only 11% of that gap. So the question, class, is to reach 100% funding, how much of the gap is the governor going to have to fund in 2019-20 to 2021 in order to make it 100%? 100% of the gap. So the governor, so the last year of reaching our goal within LCFF, the gap funding is supposed to be 100%. So we're at a third next year, which is good, but we're only at a ninth in 2016-17.
I'm sorry. So the number that I thought I saw was that we're 85% of the way to being 100% fully funded.
Okay.
And when
well, I see 32% of the way to 100%.
No, that's just of this year's gap. In other words,
if you roll
keep all
back
of
the
our
numbers
prior
to
money.
2012, 13, 13, 14, 14, 15, so you go back to where he started and what the gap was in there. The problem is you say, you know, everybody's.
well, I'm not actually going backwards. I think
Okay.
what I did is I said, because we have in our calculations, I think, fully funded. And then I just said,
There
let's
is a number.
divide what we're getting divided by fully funded, and it was 85%, which was the number that I'd seen either in the LAO or in one
There
of
you
the
go.
other
So
publications.
we're at 85%. So if we're at 100,
3 years in.
if we're at 120 million and we're supposed to be at 140 million, we're only 20 million off. So 20 million divided by 120.
I guess
right,
what I'm
you're-
saying is, so
You're at 85. You know.
over an 8-year process,
Mm-hmm.
we're 85% of the way in the first 3 years.
Right, and how far were we in the year one? Some districts were already at 85%. Right? Depending on your free and reduced lunch, your unduplicated count.
Okay, I guess what I
So the governor is saying that
was-
we are now
and maybe-
funding 80, on average throughout the state,
Okay.
85%.
and it's just a coincidence that our number is also 85%.
What's the average unduplicated count in the state? I think it's about 63, 64%. We're at 69, so we're just over average. So
But one could say that the governor's front-loading it, if you will.
you
if
can't
that's
say that we're 85% of the way there because we didn't start at zero. Right, so everybody started at a rate. Some people were 60% of the way there, some people were 80% of the way there. Some people were 99% of the way there, because remember, there's a floor and a.
Well,
and
what
a
I'll always
hold
say,
harmless.
and I think I may have said this before, is there's a feeling, I think, and this is certainly kind of the general knowledge of this is, oh, in 8 years we'll be fully funded no matter what happens. And as we can see, it's been front-loaded, but if
Well-
Prop 98 goes down, the gap funding could actually be negative. And so people have to understand that this is not a straight, nice rise to 20.
Well,
Correct.
when, Ms. Kinney, I guess I would suggest that fully funded is still not enough, because compared to other state averages of students, we are still severely underfunded, regardless of reaching 100% of the target.
And I did want to ask a question. You said that the 46%, are those
46th in the nation.
now based on
Oh, 2011, 12.
LCFF?
Yeah, those are a
So that's
couple year old
prior to
numbers.
LCFF still. So we're
think so.
still hoping that LCFF looks
Will-
us a little bit
Will get us
better.
maybe to 40th in the nation.
All right. And then, I'm sorry, you said that we were getting the one-time funding. On the page with,
I
on
don't-
this
I don't-
page,
Yes.
are we seeing the 3 million
No,
there in those numbers?
It is not there.
Okay. So
So
we will
the-
have more to spend that year, but it will be of a
We'll have
one-time
more
nature.
in 2015-16 to spend by $3 million. That's supposed to be for Common Core implementation, the new EL standards. We're talking about ELA adoptions and and textbooks and instructional materials and technology to get ready for fully implemented state testing. So the governor has a whole litany of things that they're forcing us into that costs a lot of money. And so he's saying, well, we're going to give you school districts $1 billion. You decide on what your highest priority is. And for us, it's about $3 million. And we probably have about $8 million in needs to fund those things that I just rattled off. $3 million doesn't even cover an English language arts adoption in PUSD, I wouldn't.
So it's a one-time funding, but it does not have to be spent in that year?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I just kind of wanted to understand kind of the
Correct,
impact
and
of
so
it.
it is not here, and we have to talk about what plans and instructional materials, plans and Common Core implementation plans and all those, so those will be coming forward.
And so just to, looking at that, it looks like for this year, we've got a little extra over our reserves, but certainly not a lot. And this is without having made new additions to our expenditures.
And when you say little, you mean $9,000 in a $180 million budget?
I'm looking at 15, 16.
Oh, I'm
so
sorry. Oh, there you go. Oh, perfect. Yes, a little, almost a $500,000, right, which is, represents about 0.3% beyond our reserve.
Dr. McDonough, do you want to talk about anything about our, as we're moving forward and planning our 15, 16 budget? Any philosophical guidance for us?
No, not at this time. I'd prefer for us to, I'm convening a superintendent's budget committee. We'll meet here in about a week or so to look at a number of things, including our financial goals, to look at how we can possibly run a more efficient operation, how we can possibly make some cuts while preserving our programmatic goals. And so I think in the upcoming weeks, we'll have much more information for the board and the public regarding the direction that we're taking in terms of our financial or fiscal issues. I will say that certainly it's troubling for me, the situation that we're in, just barely meeting our reserves, so to speak, the mandated amount. When you look at a district like, for example, and I said this before, Oceanside, they're almost insolvent simply because of they found mold in 3 of their schools. So, it's concerning. It's concerning that the state is not funding us like it should, like Mr. Selinsky said. But nevertheless, I think we have to try our very best to operate a school system that's as efficient and as effective as possible. So in the upcoming weeks, we'll be coming back to the board with some recommendations around possible cuts that we might make. And we'll talk some more about what our fiscal priorities should be for the upcoming months and years.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Pappalardo.